The rain pounded the cracked windshield as Mason gripped the wheel, his son fast asleep in the back seat. He was late for his night shift again, but just as he turned onto the empty road past the old church, he slammed the brakes. There she was, a woman in a soaked wedding dress, curled up on the church steps, barefoot and trembling. "Please," she whispered through tears, "don't leave me here. Let's begin." Mason Reed didn't have time for detours. Not when bills were piled on his kitchen counter and his 6-year-old son Caleb hadn't had a proper meal since Thursday. But life never asked for permission before throwing curveballs. The night was soaked in silence, except for the rain rattling on the truck's metal roof. Mason's headlights cut through the darkness like twin swords, and just as he was about to pass the old abandoned church on Oak Ridge Hill, he spotted someone, curled up on the stone steps like a discarded porcelain doll. His heart told him to keep driving. His brain reminded him of Caleb in the back seat, of how dangerous strangers could be. But his soul knew that the kind of man he wanted his son to grow up to be would never leave a crying woman in the rain. He pulled over. The woman didn't even flinch at the sound of tires skidding. She was in a white lace wedding dress, soaked through to the skin, shivering violently. Mascara streaked her pale cheeks, and her bouquet, what was left of it, lay in pieces at her feet. Mason stepped out, squinting through the downpour. "Ma'am," he called gently, trying not to spook her. "You okay?" She looked up, startled, but her voice came out hollow. "They sold me," she whispered, his stomach twisted. "What do you mean, sold you?" "My parents, my fiancé. It wasn't a wedding, it was a transaction." Mason stared at her, stunned. She couldn't have been older than 24. Her hands were trembling so hard she couldn't even pull her hair out of her eyes. "I ran," she choked. "Right after the vows, I just kept running." Caleb stirred in the back seat, mumbling his dad's name in his sleep. Mason glanced back, then back at her. She looked like she might collapse. He had no idea who she was, but something told him she had nowhere else to go. "Get in the truck," he said. "You'll freeze out here." "I don't want trouble," she replied, panic flashing in her eyes. "You won't get any from me," Mason promised. "Just a warm place to sit and a cup of something hot, that's all. I've got a kid in the back seat, so you know I mean it." Her lips parted slightly. Then she nodded. That was the moment everything changed. Mason opened the passenger door and grabbed a blanket from behind his seat. The woman stepped in slowly, flinching as the door clicked shut. Her soaked wedding dress clung to her like a second skin, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. Caleb blinked awake, rubbing his eyes. "Daddy? Who's she?" Mason gave him a soft smile. "Someone who needs our help tonight, buddy. Be kind." The boy yawned and nodded, curling back into his blanket. His trust made Mason's chest ache. Mason turned the heat all the way up and handed the woman the blanket. "Here," he said. "I'm Mason. That's Caleb." She looked down, silent for a moment, then whispered, "Savannah, Savannah," Mason repeated softly. "That's a pretty name." She tried to smile, but her lips quivered too much. I don't know where to go." "You don't have to figure that out right now," he said. "Let's get you dry first." He drove them home, his small, cluttered 2-bedroom rental that smelled of pine-scented cleaner and survival. It wasn't much, but it was safe. Inside, Mason gave her one of his ex-wife's old hoodies and a pair of sweatpants. She hesitated before accepting, her face full of apology, shame, and gratitude all rolled into one. She emerged from the bathroom. 10 minutes later, looking less like a shattered bride and more like a scared girl, holding herself together with invisible thread. "Tea?" Mason asked. She nodded. As the kettle hissed, Caleb padded into the room, hugging his stuffed bear. He stared at Savannah, wide-eyed. "Are you okay now?" She blinked, taken aback by his innocence. "I think so. she whispered. Thanks. To your dad. Caleb gave her a thumbs up and walked back to bed like it was the most normal thing in the world. Savannah looked at Mason. He's sweet. He's all I've got, Mason said quietly, handing her the tea. Lost his mom 3 years ago. I'm sorry, don't be, just means we take care of each other. There was silence for a while as the rain softened outside. Then, quietly, Savannah said, they were going to marry me off to a business partner's son. Someone older, violent, controlling. He threatened me before the ceremony. Said if I embarrassed him, I'd regret it. Mason clenched his jaw. And your parents were okay with that? They arranged the whole thing, took money for it, called it a blessing. Mason stared at her, fury rising in his gut. You did the right thing running. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't plan it. I just kept walking. He nodded slowly. Well, I guess this was meant to happen. She looked up at him. Why are you being so kind? Mason shrugged. Because the world isn't kind. Not often. But that kid in there, he deserves to believe in good people. And maybe we all do. Savannah looked away quickly, hiding the tear that slipped down her cheek. Neither of them knew it yet, but in that tiny kitchen, something sacred was born. Not love, at least not yet, but trust. And sometimes trust is even more powerful. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, golden and soft. Savannah woke slowly, the scent of coffee and scrambled eggs drifting in from the kitchen. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she looked down at the oversized hoodie wrapped around her and remembered the wedding, the running, the stranger who stopped. She sat up slowly on the small couch, her muscles sore from the cold and the long night. Her heart was still heavy, but it beat a little steadier than before. From the kitchen she heard laughter. Caleb, do eggs fly when you throw them really hard? He asked innocently. Mason chuckled. Not unless you want scrambled ceilings. Savannah couldn't help but smile. She stepped into the doorway, brushing a hand through her tangled hair. Mason turned, spatula in hand, and froze. She looked different in the light, tired, still fragile, but more human. Less like a runaway bride and more like a woman trying to take back her life. Hey, he said, suddenly aware of how mismatched. She looked in his ex-wife's hoodie. Morning, she said, her voice hoarse. Caleb lit up. You're awake. I am, she smiled. Are you going to stay for pancakes too? He asked eagerly. Savannah blinked. I don't want to intrude. Mason shook his head. You're not. Caleb already made room on the plate. The kindness was disarming. Again. She sat at the table slowly as Mason poured her coffee. I have no ID, she said suddenly, breaking the moment. No money. No phone. I dropped it all when I ran. Mason nodded. We'll figure that out. First, food. Savannah looked down at the plate, simple, warm, and made with care. She hadn't been fed out of love in years. They ate quietly for a while, the sound of Caleb humming, filling the room like music. Then Mason said, Do you want to talk to the police? She stiffened. No, not yet. Why not? They'll make me go back. My family knows how to spin stories. They'll say I'm unstable. They'll twist everything. Mason leaned back. You think they'd do that? I know they would. And they'd make me feel like I deserved all of it. Mason stayed quiet. He could hear the fear in her voice, not just of being dragged back into a marriage she didn't want, but of being gaslit by the very people who were supposed to protect her. He remembered nights spent arguing with his ex-wife, how she used to mock his job, his lack of ambition, even his cooking, and how that cruelty echoed in Caleb's tiny bedroom when Mason sat alone. Okay, he said after a pause. Then you stay here. No one will find you here, unless you want to be found. Savannah's eyes widened. You'd do that for me? Mason looked at her, serious. I'd do it for anyone who ran from something toxic, but especially for someone who ran to protect herself. Caleb interrupted, spoon in hand. Can she stay forever? They both laughed. Savannah's smile faded slowly as her eyes filled. I don't know what I did to deserve this kindness, Mason replied softly. You don't have to do anything to deserve being treated like a human being. And in that kitchen, crowded with second-hand plates and the smell of syrup, Savannah felt safer than she had in years. 3 days passed. Savannah stayed. At first, she barely spoke, her voice trapped beneath the weight of guilt, shame, and exhaustion. But slowly, with Caleb's innocent chatter and Mason's quiet patience, her silence turned into conversation. Then soft laughs, then full smiles. She started helping around the house, doing dishes, folding laundry, even sewing a tear in Caleb's stuffed bear. Mason offered her space without question, letting her rebuild her strength without demanding explanations. But late at night, when the house settled into silence, Savannah stared out the window with a haunted look in her eyes. One morning, Mason found her standing on the porch steps hugging herself. Nightmare? He asked gently. She nodded. I dreamed I was back there in that house. My mother was pinning the veil on my head and saying, Smile pretty, Savannah. He paid double for you. Mason swallowed hard. You're safe here. Am I? She whispered. What if they find me? Then they'll have to go through me. Savannah turned to him, eyes burning. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Because you didn't deserve what happened, he said simply. And I've seen what that kind of pain can do to someone. He looked away, jaw tightening. My ex-wife left when Caleb was 3, ran off with a client from the gym she worked at, said I was too boring for the life she wanted. When I begged her not to do it for Caleb's sake, she said, You can barely afford your own dreams, Mason. Why would I want to build mine around yours? Savannah blinked. She actually said that? Yeah, he said, voice low. And the day she left, she didn't even say goodbye to Caleb. Her eyes welled. I'm so sorry. He shrugged. I stopped waiting for an apology a long time ago. Some people never look back. She was quiet a long moment, then asked, Do you ever get angry, like really angry? I used to, Mason said, but it didn't help. I started fixing engines instead. Screws don't lie to you. Wrenches don't cheat. Savannah gave a soft laugh through her nose. That's oddly comforting. Look, Mason said, you don't have to stay here forever, but until you figure out your next step, you got a roof over your head. No strings. She stared at him for a long time, something shifting behind her eyes. No one's ever protected me like this, not without wanting something in return. Mason looked down at her hand, still trembling slightly. Then maybe it's time you met someone who expects nothing but peace for you. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. Later that afternoon, Savannah helped Caleb with his homework. Mason watched from the kitchen doorway as Caleb leaned against her shoulder, giggling, calling her Miss Vanna. That night, as Savannah tucked him in, Caleb asked, Will you still be here tomorrow? She paused. If it's okay with your dad. I think so. Caleb smiled. Good, 'cause I think you're nice. She turned off the lamp and closed the door with a trembling hand. Outside, Mason stood quietly with 2 mugs of tea. He offered one without a word. They sipped in silence on the porch, watching the stars. For the first time in years, neither of them felt completely alone. 2 weeks later, Savannah no longer flinched at every knock on the door. She had stopped folding her arms protectively when she walked into a room. She'd even started humming quietly when she washed dishes. Caleb had begun calling her V, and Mason, though never pushy, caught himself looking at her longer than he should have, especially when she smiled like the world hadn't broken her, but the calm couldn't last forever. It was a Saturday morning. Mason was out front changing the brake pads on a neighbor's car when a black luxury SUV pulled up across the street. 2 men stepped out. Suits, earpieces, the kind of men who didn't knock. They entered. Savannah saw them from the window and froze. Her breath caught, heart thundering as she backed away from the curtain. No, not now. Not when she had started to breathe again. "Savannah Reed," one of them called. "We need to speak with you." Mason was already moving. He dropped the wrench and walked into the yard, wiping his hands on a rag. "You can speak with me first." "This doesn't concern you, sir." "It does now," he said, stepping between them and the house. One of the men narrowed his eyes. "Her parents have filed a missing persons report. They claim she's unstable. There's a mental health warrant issued by a private clinic in Denver. If she's here, we're authorized to bring her in. She's not a patient. She's, not unstable. And you have no authority without a police escort. They showed papers." Mason didn't blink. "Let me call my lawyer. You'll be waiting a while." The taller man tried to push past. Savannah opened the door. No, she stepped outside barefoot, trembling, but she didn't run. Her voice was calm. "Tell my parents I'm not property. I'm not crazy. And if they send anyone else after me, I'll go public. I'll tell everyone about what they did, about what he did." "Savannah," one man began. "You take one step toward that child," she said, nodding toward Caleb inside, "and I'll press charges that will stick longer than your careers." They paused, measured her, realized she wasn't bluffing. Then they backed off, muttering, "This isn't over." As they drove away, Mason turned to her, stunned. "You didn't run," he said. "I wanted to," she admitted. "But then I thought about Caleb, about you, and I realized I've been running all my life." She folded into his arms, and for the first time it didn't feel like she was being rescued. It felt like coming home. 6 months later. The garage had changed. A second lift was added. Mason hired help, and behind the counter sat Savannah, wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and a smile that no longer looked borrowed. She managed the books, handled customers, saved every penny. Caleb came back from school one day, holding a drawing. It was a stick-figure family. Mason, Caleb, and a woman with brown hair. He ran up and gave it to her. "I drew you." Savannah crouched, tears in her eyes. "You drew me. You're in the family now," he said simply. "You're my V." Mason watched from the doorway. That night, Savannah sat next to Mason on the porch. The stars were out again. "You ever think," she said, "that one wrong turn saved your whole life?" He looked at her. "Every day." She placed a hand over his, and for the first time, she didn't feel like someone who had been saved. She felt like someone who had survived and chose to stay.